Hello world, welcome to Learning Java, one byte at a time. This is video 42 in a tutorial series geared at bringing the wonderful wide world of Java to those with little or no programming experience. This video is a continuation of the development of the Booker application, a vehicle appraisal app. In the last video, we were plugging away at our view class by defining the setter methods. Previously, we were defining the getter methods, and now we're kind of at the very end of this class. We need to define the event listeners for the couple of buttons that we have here in our view element. And so this will be a fairly short video. Let's go ahead and jump into Notepad++, and you see here we have all of our previously written code here, the setter methods from the last video. In this video, we're going to very quickly write the event listeners for the couple of view objects that will need them. And then we'll come back again in the next video and begin working on the model class. And so the action listeners that we have are going to be applied to the generate add button, the new button, the save button, and the load button, because those will be the four things that when clicked actually need to perform some sort of activity. And so we're going to go ahead and define this as being, these are not going to need to be public because these action listeners are going to be managed by the actual class itself, although the controller and the model class will be able to prompt for these action listeners. They're going to be doing so by creating an instance of this rather than necessarily accessing them directly the same way you would a getter or setter method. And so the easiest way to do this is to simply define them as void, and we're going to call the first one the vehicle previous owner's checkbox listener. And the point of this action listener is to activate or deactivate the text field that is going to enable the user to enter some number of previous owners. And so I know it seems like this is something that should be taken care of within the view class, but again, keeping to the principle of single responsibility, we're actually going to put the model class in control of turning that text field on and off. And so essentially what's going to happen is the user is going to click the checkbox. Let's say that they're clicking that there were previous owners. The model class is going to listen for that event, and when it hears that event, it is then going to call the class or the method in this class that sets that text field as being enabled. And so it's just a diffusion of responsibility. It's creating more loosely coupled code so that if we needed to make any changes or scale up, we wouldn't have to do so much maintenance in order to do so. And so this is all keeping with the design principle, the design pattern of the MVC, the Model View Controller Design Pattern. And so for the vehicle previous owner's checkbox listener, we're going to pass through what's called an action listener that we'll simply call listener. We don't need to be very specific in this case. And we're going to have the vehicle previous owner's checkbox, and we're just going to add the action listener to the checkbox. And it needs a parameter, or it needs an argument, so we're going to pass through the action listener that we defined in the parameter field right here. And so that's all we have to do for that. Again, we're maintaining single responsibility principle, so we don't want to have the view class actually be in charge of doing anything. We simply need to define the action listener and say that it is here and it is attached to this view object, and that's all we need to do in this class. So next we'll do a void. This one will be for the generate sales add button. So we're going to do vehicle generate add button. We're going to access that object, but we're going to call this method a listener method. So we're going to do a vehicle generate add button listener, and just like the other one, we're going to pass through an action listener that we're just going to call listener, and we're simply going to attach that listener to this view object. So we're going to look for the vehicle generate add button. We're going to add an action listener to the add button, and we're going to pass through the listener that we defined in the parameter list. So pretty easy. Next, we're going to do the vehicle new button. And we'll call this vehicle new button listener. We're going to pass through an action listener that we'll call listener, and simply attach it to the vehicle new button, like so. And it needs to know which listener to attach. We'll tell it to attach the listener that we passed through in the method parameter. And next we'll do the vehicle save button listener. And we need to define an action listener, or we need to accept an action listener that we're going to call listener. And that listener that gets passed through will get attached to the vehicle save button. Add action listener, and it's going to be that listener that we pass through. And lastly, we have the load button. So let's do a void vehicle load button listener. It'll be an action listener that we're expecting. We'll call it listener, and then we'll take that listener passed through and attach it to the vehicle load button. All right, so pretty simple from this end, so nothing much there. And then to finish this class off, the last thing I want to do is define a method that will provide an alert that will have a message of our making. And so this alert is going to be a general purpose alert. It might be to let the user know that there was an error, or that there was something that happened successfully, like the file was saved successfully or loaded successfully. Whatever the case may be, we're going to call this method display alert. It's going to be expecting a string. We'll pass that through. We'll just call whatever's passed through as the alert. And we're going to access the J option pane object, and this has a method called show message dialog, which just comes up with a little dialog box. And whenever the show message dialog button is called, it's going to be expecting two things. It's going to need to know what panel or what pane that's attached to, and then what the message is it should apply, or it should show. And so we're going to pass through this keyword. So we're going to be referring to this instance of this object. So when it's saying, well, what panel is this being applied to? Well, we're going to say, well, it's whatever panel is being instantiated at the time. So it's going to be this panel, whatever this means at the time. And the message that we want you to display is going to be whatever we pass through as the string value. And so when we call display alert and give it a string, whatever particular panel happens to be instantiated at that time, that's the one that you're going to be displaying a message from. And the string that you're going to be displaying as the message is going to be whatever we pass through to you. And so that's pretty much it. And so I think that actually brings this class to a close. We've done a lot of coding and not very much testing. And so before we move on to the model and the controller classes, we're going to come back in the next video and we're going to write a small unit testing class to actually instantiate this view object and make sure that everything comes up as expected. Now, it won't have any functionality per se, because that's going to be the case of, or that's going to be the responsibility of the model class, but we will be able to see if we can successfully instantiate this class and come up with the user interface as a bare bones construct. And so that's all we have so far for this class. This class is now finished. We can go ahead and move on to the next video where we perform that unit testing. Just as always, and you can see here we have nearly 600 lines of code here, so this was an enormous class. The rest of this project is going to go pretty quickly. But just as always, the final version of this project, all of the code is available through a link to the GitHub in the description. Feel free to download that if this becomes too tedious. Otherwise, hopefully this was fun, and we'll see everyone back again in the next video. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night.